right, hello everyone. Can everybody hear me today? All right, I can't see a ton with these lights, so I'm taking a couple nods is good. I appreciate all the time here today coming to .local London. I know it's a lot of out of your daily lives and efforts, and some of you traveling here. So we really appreciate your time coming here. And hopefully all the sessions so far today have been really good. I think the keynote is extremely interesting with MongoDB 8.0 coming out and some of the specific notes around that as far as improvements around performance and additional features. So hopefully you've all seen that as super useful. And we'll dive into my topic here today. So as Peter mentioned, I'm Evin Roesle. I'm a lead product manager here at MongoDB. I've been with MongoDB for about 5 years now, and I look after a couple of different products on my team. So I look after all of the backups here at MongoDB. So that's our on-premise and Atlas backups. And then the overall solution for our Ops Manager and Cloud Manager products, which help our on-premise customers manage, deploy, automate, backup, and monitor the enterprise advanced deployments that they would put on their on-premise instances. Today, we'll be discussing about data resiliency and compliance strategies within MongoDB Atlas. So let's jump to the agenda here first. Number one, we're going to start with what is data resilience. So we're going to put a little bit of definition around this, as every company has a little bit different understanding of exactly what that means for your company. Then we're going to look at the data compromise trends within 2023. So kind of set the stage why this is important and why we should care about this. Some of you may know this. Some of you may want to send this back to other people in your companies to emphasize some of the importance of some of these strategies. Then we'll dive into, at a high level, some aspects that we can do with prevention within MongoDB Atlas to prevent some of these data compromises from happening in the first place. And then we'll look at some of the recovery strategies that we have within MongoDB Atlas as well. Hopefully, we're going to end with a little bit of QA time here, as far as about probably 5 minutes to answer any questions that you may have at the end of this talk. If you have anything afterwards, though, please come and find me. I'll be off the stage and more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. As a quick highlight, this is going to be a very high-level kind of summary and talk. Each of these I could not only spend 30 minutes on, but I could probably spend like 7 hours on easily each. So we're not going to go through every single piece. We're not going to go through exactly how to configure these for your deployment. This is a high-level overview of what you should be looking at and things to dive into afterwards after today's conversation. All right, so what is data resilience? Ultimately, data resilience is ensuring that regardless of what is going on, that our workloads, our clusters, and our applications can continue to run. So the ideal state is that we always are obviously fully functioning, but even in the event of some sort of event or issue or attack, we want to at least continue to be as operational as possible with this. And hopefully we don't have to recover. But if there is something that we actually do need to recover, that we can ensure recovery is accurate and consistent, but also fast, depending on what kind of situation we have. So that's kind of the frame around data resilience, is make sure that we have as limited impact regardless of what kind of situations are going on or what kind of pokes and prods at the fences, so to speak, of security are happening. So let's take a look at the global data compromise, which is on the rise, which I'm sure is why you all are here and interested in that. The number one stat that I want to talk about to start off with is how many publicly reported data compromise events have happened in 2023. So based on a survey, there was 3,200 publicly reported data compromise events within 2023. Now, this may seem lower than you expect, but remember that these are publicly reported data compromise events. So there's a lot of different sizes of companies around the world. They don't all have to actually report that they have compromised. Some of them may not even know that they've been compromised, as a lot of companies can go months, if not more, without actually knowing that there's an attacker already installed within their system. Now, out of these 3,200 publicly reported events, there was over 350 million individuals that were affected by this. So while it's only in the thousands, I say only, but in the thousands as far as the data compromise attacks that were noted, it has a giant effect about the amount of individuals that are impacted. Now, this was a 72% increase over 2021 and a 78% increase over 2022. So we're seeing these numbers drastically increase, even just year over year when we're talking about a 12-month period. The number one way that these data compromise events happens is cyber attacks. So this is over 2/3 of the data compromise events were due to cyber attacks, which is about 2,400 of the 3,200 publicly reported events. So this is definitely the main attack vector that companies are experiencing when they're looking at the different data compromises. We'll go through more of a full list, but this is absolutely the main thing that happens generally when a data compromise comes up within a company. Now looking at the top two industries, number one is healthcare. We can all probably assume why that is the case. There's a ton of personal information that is stored within healthcare systems. So it's a great place for ransomware attackers or bad actors to go into and get a lot of valuable information. And the same thing with the second industry, which is our financial services. Again, you can kind of figure out why somebody would want to go after financial services as well. Not only does it have the actual personal information, but it has all of the account information, financial information that can be used pretty heavily. Now to back up, the final stat that I like to look at is kind of companies impacted. So while I said there was only 3,200 publicly reported at the beginning of this slide, a survey that was done in 2023 actually had a response that 66% of organizations experienced a ransomware attack within 2023. So this is 2/3 of the companies that were surveyed actually admitted that they had some sort of ransomware attack. Some can be very small, some can be very large. Some data compromise events can be up into the billions of dollars as far as impact there. Out of this, actually, 9% of the US publicly traded companies were also impacted and had to issue a data breach notice within 2023. So this is not only smaller companies, these are happening to companies of all sizes that are out there and have different IT and systems out there. So let's look at the cost of this. Usually that's where our executives want to start with first, is what is the cost of an event like this? And the numbers are pretty staggering. So global average is almost about 4.5 million US dollars on average for one of these attacks. And the US average is almost 9.5 million. So this is probably a good reason that you're not in the US. You may have a couple of other reasons. We can leave those to the side. But the global is still a very high number. Now, if we dig into what is some of the impact and what are the reasons of those, there's basically top three pieces that funnel into this 4.5 million US dollars. Number one, at about 1.6 million worth, is detection and escalation. So just basically understanding that you have had an attack, understanding where it's coming from, what happened, how long it's been there, and then escalating that within the executive team, within the leadership organization. That alone stands for about $1.6 million worth of this total cost on average. The second leading factor is the loss of business. So this could be easily accounted for as maybe your application was down during this time, during one of these attacks, and you lose revenue. But we also include here within developer productivity. So anytime that you have to detect and then eventually fix, you're taking obviously developers' times that are generally not allocated for an event like this, and you're taking it away from a feature or a project that they're working on currently and trying to reorganize it towards the current issue. So not only do we lose potentially revenue, but there's also a possibility of losing that developer productivity. And then third, at about 1.2 million US dollars, was our post-breach response cost. So this is actually going through and fixing the systems, understanding how we talk about this, how we issue maybe a data breach compromise, and all of these are pushing towards actually the response of that. So those are the three biggest factors that play into that $4.5 million and make up the majority of the cost there. If we look again a little bit closer at the heavily targeted industries, there's three here that have actually seen a 2x growth just within the last year about the number of data compromise events that were reported. So number one, again, is healthcare. Number two is financial services. And then number three is transportation. So again, all of these industries have a lot of personal information floating around. There's obviously different levels of companies within these sectors and industries as well. You have a lot of smaller companies that are providers for a lot of these larger companies that can actually touch a lot of organizations, which are intriguing to ransomware attackers because they can get more than one company at a time there. So these are the biggest three, again, that experience 2x the growth in attacks over just the last 12 months. And healthcare, interesting enough, unless you're in healthcare, for the third consecutive year, the global healthcare cost was about $11 million per attack on average. So almost 3 times that of the normal average globally. And then the financial sector was not actually that close behind it, but still in second at $6 million. So about 150% the average cost for a cyber attack. All right, so let's talk about the attack vectors. We already named the first one, which would be cyber attacks. So this includes things like phishing, ransomware, malware, any type of attack that comes into the system from an outside organization or person. And this is moving away from just locking systems and holding kind of the systems at ransom, but this is also moving towards deleting data, completely wiping out data, corrupting data. They're being much more targeted in the way that they're looking at manipulating this and even selling it to third parties. And as I mentioned before, there's also more attacks on organizations that are pipelines to a lot of these larger multinational companies. They're no longer only targeting, they're still targeting them, but they're no longer only targeting the larger multinational companies because they found that if they have someone that is tied into multiple large international companies, they can get more information at that time. And these smaller companies may have less stringent security or less testing in areas there, so they tend to be sometimes more vulnerable within kind of that supply chain, so to speak. And one of the areas that I think is interesting, I'll say, in a kind of a scary way, is what cybersecurity experts now are seeing is that actually these ransomware users are actually taking this information now and pairing it generally with generative AI so that they can utilize or increase the impact of what they can do with this, whether it is how they're being more sophisticated in reaching out to these people that have their identity stolen or information stolen about them, so that they're more likely to interact with their kind of phishing attempts and things like that. Number 2 is system and human error. So while we all like to think we do everything and code everything in the perfect way, it is still the saying that error is human, right? We all make mistakes. There's always going to be an accident or something where we, accidentally delete something. Maybe we corrupt some data on accident. Maybe a deploy is bad. And especially in the world where kind of developers are encouraged to move faster and faster, there's a lot of more appetite, or shouldn't say appetite, but there's more likelihood that this happens in the future with customers or with developers who are actually looking at really trying to move fast and less kind of guardrails on what they're actually deploying from day to day. So this is about 20% of the data compromise events is somebody, again, makes an error, they have maybe delete some sort of data, and this can often propagate to multiple systems there. Next is bad actors. So related a little bit to the cyber attack area, but with bad actors, this is generally someone internally to the company that actually knows that they're not supposed to be in a certain information or that certain information is protected, and they specifically go after that, maybe to sell it, maybe to delete it out of revenge for something. But these are people that generally are causing more damage because they know the systems. Either they have access to it or they understand where the vulnerabilities in those systems are. So while IT teams have a hard job to kind of protect the entire environment outside of different systems and IT systems, the bad actors can really do a lot of damage because they have a full understanding of where they can get to, what kind of information it is, and where the vulnerabilities are. And then finally, physical attacks, they still do happen, obviously becoming much less common, but these are stealing laptops, stealing notepads and things like that around the office. So much less than it was probably 20 years ago for sure, but still something to keep an eye on as we try to build out a full data resilience. And each are unique, right? maybe these companies get prodded and poked by the ransomware attackers in the same way, but everybody has a little bit different configuration. Even if the configuration is not perfect, they're going to be infiltrated and attacked in different ways and a little bit different, even if it's the same overall systems that they're using. So there's not one easy way just to say that we need to lock down this system in this way and protect this aspect. We continually have to look at all the different aspects of how our systems are set up and how they're connected to each other to really make sure that we're figuring out that our systems are as secure as possible. So we can have high availability, which will help us in a catastrophic failure, but that doesn't help us in deletion or corruption. So we need to make sure that we account for all different types of possible events that could be going on and the different attack vectors that I just had on the last slide. I think a lot of people would say our first care is for our customers' data and making sure that we have a good reputation and genuinely trying to take care of customer data. But there's other reasons that companies also look at this too, is because, well, they have standards and they have regulations of what they're required to do. So some of the standards that you might be familiar with are SOC 2, AppJ, the HIPAA, and then PCI if you're in the credit card industry. There's obviously also DORA here in the Europe, and any specific countries have also regulations depending on where you're at in the UK or India. They all have their own specific requirements. So we do this out of the good of trying to protect our own customers' data and information, but there's a lot more of these regulations that are increasing every single day. Almost every customer that I talk to, regardless of whether we're talking databases or not, has an increase every almost 6 months now of what they're required and what they have to do. And they know for the next couple of years that those requirements are getting even more and more strict. So we have to make sure that our systems are ready to be able to handle these different types of regulations and fit within the requirement that our regulators and that these standards kind of outline. All right, so now a little bit of specific into Atlas. Again, we're not going to go into exactly how to set up different features, but we're going to give you a high level of what to look at so that you can take this away afterwards and dive into what is actually set up within your different configurations to ensure that we have the best data resiliency that we possibly can. We want all this to be automated and policy driven. So that's one of the keys here, I think, we want to highlight is that we want it to be where it's turnkey and at scale. We can't have this where developers are constantly looking and trying to understand how to update the system and make sure that it's secure with every application deployment or every time that the database goes up another 100 gigs in data. We need to make sure that it's, I don't want to say it's a set and forget, but it is a set and make sure that we have that confidence and that it will continue to operate regardless of how much our data grows or how many new developers are coming through. So first is prevention. So even though I started off saying that I'm the product manager for all of backups here at MongoDB, I hope no one ever has to use a backup. My goal is, or our goal as a company is to make sure that we're preventing these right from the beginning and that backups are never actually needed in the real world. We want to have them there, but we want to make sure that we prevent ever actually needing them. So some of the main overall topic areas here through MongoDB to the database itself, but also through Atlas, are authentication and authorization, making sure we actually have the right users hitting the right systems, as well as also the right software authenticating as well. TLS and SSL, so anytime data is moving, that we have that data secure if it's not sitting in one place on disk or something like that. Make sure that that's also secure. Encryption, we've talked a little bit in the keynote today about the awesome things that our queryable encryption is continuing to improve on. So there's that. There's also encryption at rest with using your own keys. And then, of course, auditing. Obviously, auditors love auditing. That's in their name. And then the log redaction. So we need all this information. We need to understand what that kind of history and how we went about that and who touched what system. But we also don't want to expose sensitive data within our logs themselves. So we need to make sure that we can redact those. Now in Atlas, we have a bunch of these by default as far as our security posture. Access controls, TLS, storage level encryption on the disks themselves at rest are all by default and mandated on our Atlas clusters. But there's a lot of other things that you can do to build on top of that and really configure it specifically for your company and your industry and regulations. To look at a couple of those, Number one is role-based access controls, which again is by default within MongoDB Atlas, but also with our IP access list. So ensuring that it's not only the right people who have the right type of access to a specific operation or action, but making sure it's coming from the right systems. And then we also have OIDC authentication and authorization. So the authorization part is a little bit new. And this allows us to make sure that your Atlas clusters are both can authenticate and authorize correctly for human users, but also applications with your own identity provider, as long as they support OIDC or OAuth 2. And then next there would be the encryption piece, like I talked about. So the very basic is the encrypting of the disks, which we do by default within Atlas. But you can also encrypt the data files themselves using, again, your own key. And you can use queryable encryption in the client-side field-level encryption, which allows you to encrypt your data before it ever hits the database. So you do this on the client side. The database never has access to the unencrypted data. And with queryable encryption, you can still actually have a very expressive queries ran on that data. As maybe you heard in the keynote today, we're expanding that more and more as often as we can to make that as expressive as possible so that your data is still safe regardless of how it's moving around, but you still have access to run the same type of queries and still do the same type of reads as if you would as if it wasn't encrypted. And then lastly, the backup compliance policy. So this is going to make our transition a little bit to recovery here, but basically the backup compliance policy piece is within Atlas that you can turn on. And this allows you to ensure that your backups are never deleted outside of a predefined period. So you can basically tell or set it up at the beginning at the project level where we want to ensure that backups will always be retained for, let's say, a month. And no one, regardless of the role, even the highest organization role owner, can go in and delete those backups before that period is expired. So in case a ransomware attack comes and you have something where someone's trying to delete a backup, those backups are always going to be there to make sure that we can do that recovery. Now, switching to recovery a little bit, again, I hope we never do have to recover. The goal is to never use this. It is something to have to the side. We absolutely want our backups. We want them to be in place, but we want those to be to the side to where we never have to use them with a appropriately set up configuration within all of our systems. The reason I talk about this so much, though, is that there was a survey in 2021 that looked at companies that had ransomware attacks, and only a quarter of those companies could actually recover from their ransomware attack with their backups. If I did a poll here, I would say probably 95% of people will raise their hand that they have backups and it's already done and they don't have to worry about it. But a lot of this comes down to actually testing your system and ensuring that A, you know how to use your backups in a quickly and timely manner, and B, that you actually have all of the systems that plug into your application and that your application needs actually backed up and able to come back online. There's also, like I talked about, attackers are getting smarter. They're deleting backups as well. That's where that backup compliancy policy comes in place. But for all of those reasons combined, only a quarter of those companies could actually get back online using the backups. So if you think about your own environments and where you're at, that's a pretty scary and stunning number, I think, there. And again, a good reason for us to not only have these set up, make sure it's fitting our regulations, but also please test, there's a lot more we can do on testing. I'm a little shocked sometimes when we talk to different folks about how we can actually test and do that on a more automated basis. So that's a huge piece of this as well. Looking at the specific features within MongoDB Atlas around the backups, we've tried to make this as much as a one-stop shop as possible. So the first feature there is continuous cloud backups. This is what we call our point-in-time restore, and that allows you to restore back to a granular timestamp. If you would like, you can also do wall clock time, but a granular timestamp for a specific operation right before some event so that you can get all of the data right before that event and make sure that you're not missing anything there. And then next, we also have multi-region snapshot distribution. This allows you to copy your snapshots amongst different cloud regions right within MongoDB Atlas automatically through your schedule. So if your backups are all living in the same region that your actual application and cluster are all living in, and that region, let's say, goes down by that cloud provider, then we have no access to the backups. We then have no backups. So there's no point in having those backups if we can't get back online if that cloud region is down. So by able to copy this into different cloud regions, even if an entire cloud region is down, we still have access to those backups so we can get back up and running. Next, we have download and export. So we have a lot of companies in different industries that also have requirements to make sure not only that they have copies, but that they have copies on their own hardware and maybe on tape or locked up in a vault somewhere. So this gives you the ability to either download a backup or export it directly out into AWS S3 bucket or an Azure Blob bucket as well. We just added that about a month ago on the Azure Blob side. We are working on the GCP for Google Cloud Storage. So that will be coming soon. And actually all the exports are even exported out in JSON format. So you can use this kind of outside of MongoDB if you ever needed to. We have some companies that have some regulations around that as well so that it's not tied to a specific format that's done by MongoDB. And all this is policy driven. So you can set up a schedule that has all of this outlined and the system will automatically do this for you, keeps track of all of it, make sure that we have our backups and everything on time so that they're there in case you ever need it. Again, we want to set up our systems to where we don't ever need to recover, but we need to make sure we have that option in the worst case scenario. So as a recap, we need to have all this enterprise protection built in. We really want to make sure that we have prevention and recovery. Those are the two main topics. We really want to go through and understand that this is automated and policy driven. We want to make sure it's turnkey and at scale. We don't want developers messing with this every single day and having to think about this with every single line of code that they're operating on. And we want to make sure that this actually maintains that developer productivity. Keep them focused on what they're doing, not trying to continually hit the compliance aspect of it. And lastly of this, I would say partner with us. We've helped a lot of companies through a lot of different regulations. I have conversations all the time around backups of making sure that it's hitting the different regulations for the different industries. So we really want to partner with you. Don't guess. Let's make sure that we have it set up appropriately first. We have it tested. And that way we're confident should something happen that we have everything that we have in place to prevent. And then if we ever need to actually recover on that side. So your next steps, I would encourage you to scan the QR code. This would lead you to a white page that was written about a year ago on all the different features and a little bit more in depth, and it also leads to the documentation itself. So you can find a lot more on the specific actual features that we talked about today and how to enable some of those. And I would encourage you to do this before something happens, right? We never know when something's going to happen, but based on the statistics that we talked about, it's more and more common and more likely. So let's make sure that it's a failed attempt rather than an attempt that we have to have some action and recover from. All right, we have, I think, roughly 2 minutes here. I'm gonna go ahead and save the questions and for the side, since we only have 2 minutes. But anybody that has any questions on any of this, I'm more than happy to come stay for a little bit to the side here and answer any questions that you may have. One final reminder, there is in the app, like Peter talked about in the beginning, you can go in and rate this session. We would love to hear your feedback. How can we improve this in the future? It's also tied to some prizes and points, I believe, too. So you can get some cool, interesting swag by going through and using that app. So I really appreciate the time today. Thanks for everyone for being here. Really appreciate all of the different sessions and everything going on. I hope you have a great rest of your day here at .local London.
Thank you very much, Kevin.